everyone. Happy Thursday. All right. We've got Matilda's in India now, so it's been a little bit chaotic from afar, but I can't even imagine what the actual the support team on the ground are going through. So thinking of you guys. We've got first game, Matilda's play Indonesia Friday night, so 9 p.m. It's actually a time that is almost manageable. It'll be a late night, but be very much worth it. So excited. It is for the Asian Cup, so should be a really good competition. I say that constantly. Yeah, okay, good. Thanks, Amelia. Glad that I'm not the only one who has an absolute shocker with good mornings, good afternoons. Oh, it's like the full shame moment. Oh. Awesome. Thanks for joining, everyone. We are talking pre-training today, so just as you jump on, and I'll wait for everyone to come in. All right, let's get started, hey? Oh, I'm getting all these warnings from Facebook. Let me clear this. All right. Okay, so after some conversations we've had with our clients and athletes as we start back into the new year, a question that keeps popping up is all about pre-training. So I was like, well, let's cover this in one unique little snippet. I'm hopeful that I can cover it in a real summary version. I'm just realizing that I've got some weird ass shit happening with my hair here. I'll tuck that in. And hopefully give you some clarity on when to fuel, how to fuel, and the different options when it comes to periodizing your nutrition. Because there's lots of different things you can do, and there is going to be lots of different things you've probably heard about fueling your session. So this is very specific to training. It definitely leans into some racing competition pre-nutrition, but I think that'll be another day because otherwise it's just going to be too long. And I want to keep this really, really short, sharp, and easy because you guys have also asked a lot of questions. So I want to make sure I can cover most of those as well. So when we're talking pre-training nutrition, I'm going to break it down into options. So the first option that I'm going to go through is training high. So what we call training on high carbohydrates. So we've got carbohydrate available in our muscles called glycogen, and we've got carbohydrate available from fueling before and also possibly during that session as well. And this is what we would call the gold standard for performance. We would look at the performance based around how long the session is going to go for, how intense you want to go at it, and what quality you want to complete that session at. And so if you are looking at, getting the most out of your session in terms of being able to get through it, enjoy it, and also be really, happy with how well you've gone even at the back end of that session. If your coach is like, this is, a really important session. We want high intensity. We want intermittent efforts. We want power, those types of things. It might call to you, okay, I should probably fuel this session. And so training high is something that you'll do most of the time, ideally. And the reason for that is that we do want to cause stress on the body, but we don't want to cause chronic stress on oh God, we don't want to cause chronic stress on the body that alleviates the actual, benefits of exercise and that exercise stress and the adaptations from that. So when I'm talking training high, this includes things like eating before your session or having some kind of carbohydrate before your session. Now, ideally, this is anywhere from 1 to 3 grams of carbohydrate per kilo. That's just a guide. You don't have to be precise with that. Generally, if it's a really early morning session, you might only manage that 1 gram because it's quite a lot still. Like if you're 60 to 90 kilos, it's still a lot of carbohydrates. So for a shorter, sharper session, anywhere from like your 30 to 60 minutes, you might not even have to do that. It may be as simple as getting a banana in, an up and go. It might be running out of the door with 1 crumpet, with 1 piece of toast, a glass of juice. Like it can be really, really easy, quick to handle stuff. Particularly because those early morning sessions, you're not going to get up an hour or 2 hours beforehand. You're rolling out of bed. And ideally, the first thing you're doing is starting that fueling and then getting dressed. For the main reason, it just gives you a little bit more time. However, if you're someone who's in the car and eating on your way there, that is also okay. But it's just what you choose might vary. So if you've only got, say, 30 to 60 minutes before your session, that's when you're probably choosing things like the banana. Sometimes an up and go sits really well for most people as well because it's liquid and generally is an easier to digest option, but just see how you go with that. Also things like toast and crumpets, as I mentioned, raisin toast tends to go okay. And also things like medjool dates. So really basic, easy stuff if you've only got, run out the door options. If say it's an afternoon session and you've got some time and you've maybe already had lunch and you're now having afternoon tea and now you just need a little top up before your session, that's when you could have time to have a little bit more. You might be having more things like birch and muesli or oats, or you could have your wheat bix and cereals and stuff like that, or even things like yogurt and muesli or yogurt and berries. Those types of things can absolutely play a part. And if you've got iron gut, oh my God, my words. If you've got iron guts, if you're like getting through that morning session and you're able to kind of just run out of the house after eating, a porridge, then go for it. Like, everyone's very, very individual. For an example, I am hopeless with raisin toast. Shocking, in fact. It gives me a reflux. It doesn't work for me. But I've got others who swear by it, and I would never allow my individual experience to then impact what recommendations I give you guys. So everything I'm saying here is absolutely just ideas and options, and you just take it and run with it and make sure you're trialing it in training, because this is where training high is also very, very good. Training high is important, particularly as you're leading up to competition or racing, for the main reason that it also, allows you to get through the session really well, but it also helps train your gut. And what train your gut means is that you're training your gut to be able to absorb that carbohydrate, that food, at the pace that you're going, because it demands a type of transporter that takes that glucose, that fuel, from your stomach into your bloodstream. And the more you do that, the more you train your body to be able to do that, then the better the tolerance is. So that's one purpose of Train High as well. You're also wanting to make sure that you're practicing what you're hoping to do in competition. So there's different reasons that you might be considering training high, and it means that you're going to be considering it dependent on the time of year as well. So off-season nutrition might look very different to in-season. So training high is option one. It's like the gold standard. It's definitely like the go-to. And it's what I would recommend for anyone who is going out day after day without necessarily a season. So I'm talking around if you go to the gym, 3, 4, 5 times a week, you don't generally have a really big different cycle in off season. And particularly if you're doing things like high intensity efforts that demand carbohydrate. So if you're doing intervals, if you're doing an extended long duration session at a higher intensity, if you're doing weights, then they're sessions you shouldn't do fasted. Metabolically, the best performance you're going to get is actually in a fueled state. So those types of sessions, hands down, you would generally go fueled if possible. Now, I know there's lots of questions going to be coming through, and I've seen them about, well, what if I can't, or what if I can't get anything down, or the timing doesn't work. So I will definitely cover that once I get to the question time. Now, the thing about training high is that sometimes in sports nutrition, we do the opposite of best practice. And the reason for that is that stress is where we find adaptations. And so at times we can control the amount of stress and actually increase the amount of stress within a session or after a session to drive adaptations and actually advance your performance. So sports nutrition isn't just, well, we know carbohydrate is important, so always fuel. It's saying, actually, you know what, if you're doing all these things really well, and you don't have any disordered eating symptoms, you don't have any issues with low energy availability, logistically it works, financially it works, then there are options that actually drive adaptations in specific parts of your season. And this is what we're about to go through. So there are times where you may actually hear and see us recommend training low. And the first training low I'm going to talk about is training low on glycogen stores. Now let me translate that. Glycogen is basically the name for muscle carbohydrate. So it's the carbohydrate we store in our muscle. So we can train with low carbohydrate in our muscle, then it has been shown to drive adaptations and additional stress because it upregulates some of that signaling. So when we're looking at training low on low glycogen, how would you do that? So the way that you would generally do it is that you would do a glycogen depleting session in the morning. So a glycogen depleting session, you've probably felt, right? You probably know what it feels like. you're doing really high intensity efforts, generally like things like your track sessions and stuff like that. High intensity interval efforts are very glycogen demanding and glycogen depleting. And so what you do after that, either really long session or high intensity session, is you would withhold carbohydrates from your recovery and then do another session in the afternoon. Now, the importance of this is that this is why we work closely with coaches, because I don't want to be recommending this to someone and their coach thinking that their afternoon session is their really high quality, high demand, high intensity session. And I've recommended that they do that in a low state. What we generally do alongside coaches is go, okay, well, the high intensity, high quality session is going to be in the morning. And then in the afternoon, we're going to train low, but we're going to do so in a workload and a training session that is lower priority in terms of quality. The goal is to get through it. The intensity is going to be lower. We know the athlete's going to hurt. The purpose of that training session isn't quality, speed, racing. The purpose is actually to drive adaptation and gain some adaptation and advantage in performance in the longer term. So it's very, very important that any nutrition practice that you're doing is very closely related to what you're discussing with your coaching, your SNC coach, all those types of things. So hopefully that helps. So when we're looking at training low with glycogen, that's pretty easy. It's generally done in a day. You might do if you do a morning session at say 7 a.m., you finish that by 8 or 9 a.m. Hey, if you don't have a job, and then those lives, damn it. You might then do your afternoon session after work. So you might go, the full day, 8 hours without carbohydrate. For the pro athletes, we might be only doing say 3 to 5 hours because we don't have to worry about the workday. So it's very dependent on the individual. And what we would then do is also in that concept of train low is consider other options. So training low in terms of fasting, which I'm sure everyone wants to talk about. So fasted training gets lots of airtime in terms of being fat burning, and fat burning and fat oxidation and fat loss, are very different things. So fat oxidation and burning fat is one thing, but losing fat, very different. And so even if we're burning fat, it doesn't mean that we're losing fat. It's very different. And so make sure you read between the lines when people are claiming that fasted training is the better option in terms of weight loss. It's simply not true. What we generally find, and you may find in your own behavior, is that either fasted training leads to you not going at the intensity and quality that you like within a session, or it may lead to you overeating after the session due to extreme hunger or, changes in appetite and fullness. So be judged on what works for you. Fasted training isn't wrong. It's not going to be the be all and end all, but it does depend on what you want to get out of the session. If you want to get the most out of the session, particularly if it's high intensity, a longer session, I'm talking HIIT training, weights training, interval training, and then all the way into that endurance sessions. Doing that in a state that's fed is going to be best practice, particularly if the goal is quality. However, there are times where you might consider training low, and this is definitely options in the off season when the quality of the session is lower and it's more just on higher load, and you can get away with different maybe you are okay to hit the wall on the bike, or maybe you are okay not to hit a PB, or your recovery is not as important because you don't have another session, that day or in the next 24 hours, then training fasted is definitely an option, and it's a strategy. Very similar to training low with low glycogen. What it does is it upregulates this signaling, and it can lead to extra adaptation. So stress is adaptation. Now, stress that's controlled stress is great in terms of adaptation, but if that stress is uncontrolled and happens chronically and our body doesn't recover from it, that's when we see really poor impacts in terms of overtraining, fatigue, muscle soreness, poor results in terms of performance, all those types of things. So training low is something we do really strategically, but it's not something we want to do all the time, and particularly not something that you would use in the lead up to a key competition or a key training block. It's something that needs to be thought out, and it can absolutely advance your performance. But if it's used incorrectly, it can absolutely be the decline in your performance as well. So just considering what you want to get out of the session is going to be the theme here if you haven't got it already. Another really cool strategy, I think I'm up to number 4. Is this sleep low concept. I'm going to tell you it's probably one of my favorites because it's the easiest. Less painful. You don't have to change all that much about your food. You don't have to overthink it. You don't have to go hungry. It's a concept that's actually pretty cool. The evidence for it is still mixed, but it's advancing. One of the best studies that came out was actually from a group of trained triathletes over in Europe. And what they did was they did a hard glycogen depleting session of an afternoon night. So think, again, that high intensity interval session, longer duration. So track running, like all those types of things are what we would refer to as glycogen depleting. And then you hold back on carbohydrates in your recovery. So this is only something you would do if you have a really great positive relationship with food. I can't stress that enough. I do not do this with all our athletes, and it is not something that all athletes should do. It is very much something that we can do as a tool in the toolbox to advance adaptations at key points in your season, but it's definitely not something you would do all the time. And what you do to sleep low is just that. We still eat, but we eat a very high fat, high protein intake and a low carbohydrate. So pretty much those keto meals, if you like. So not too high in protein because that can then be translated into glycogen, but we do want a high fat option. So generally what we would feed our athletes doing sleep low is what you would find as a keto meal option. So you're doing things like if it's an afternoon session, you'd then have a keto meal for dinner, and you can definitely still have supper, but it's just aiming for very low carbohydrate intake. And then in the morning, you would just have breakfast as normal. So this is why I kind of like it, because the compliance is easier. It's definitely, something that most people can achieve. It's only a very short window of time that you have to change what you're going to eat and choose in terms of what you put on your plate. And then in the morning, you're still able to do a session pretty well quality because you can still fuel for it as well. So that is definitely an option. The last option for fueling, just to overcomplicate it completely, is actually a combo. I have no other technical term for it. They're basically using, able to fuel well in that morning session and do that training high, as we said, as best practice. And then using those afternoon sessions or the day after sessions to train low. So it's making sure that you are still recovering, but also making sure you're not putting yourself accidentally in a state of low energy availability. So that's really important as well. There's no point doing all these things if we're overcomplicating it, we're causing anxiety, we're leading to more stress, it's confusing, or it just feels too hard. The reason we do it is so that it feels strategic and it feels really purposeful, and it doesn't impact relationship with food, and it feels like something that's just an advancement to what you're already doing with the foundations of your nutrition. We also want to make sure, of course, like that the tolerance is there, logistics are there. Like if someone's doing shift work or if someone has really long hours, I'm not going to go, okay, well, you're just going to have to underfuel for your day. I realize that you might have to, make really critical decisions at work. You might have to make sure you're focused. You might be running after kids and, probably don't want to be hangry and irritable. All those things, make sure that we're just considering, is it actually going to do more harm than good? Or is it actually a tool in the toolbox that is applicable to someone and able to be used? So there's no right or wrong there. It's just all different options to how to train in pre-training. The other thing, I guess, because there is a lot of talk around keto and fat adaptation and all those types of things. The piece here is really considering what's the metabolic demand of your training and of your sport, whatever that may be. If the metabolic demand for your sport really goes off intensity, quality, things like hill efforts, sprints, intervals, long endurance with intermittent sprints in between. So I know lots of people are like, well, Ironman's like an endurance, but within Ironman, you are going up hills. You are demanding that higher intensity exercise. You might be chasing down a breakaway in cycling. You may be sprinting at the finish line. All those types of things demand carbohydrate. And so even though you might be really, like, oh, maybe fat adaptation's for me, What we do know is that carbohydrate is the most economic option for energy. And what that means is that it's the easiest and fastest way to create ATP, which is your energy while you're training. So carbohydrates are a really good option if you're demanding quality and intensity. You can absolutely improve your ability to switch to fat oxidation, but the goal isn't to be completely fat burning. The goal is to be really good at switching between fat oxidation and carbohydrate use when you need it, and sparing that muscle glycogen when you don't. So the goal of sports nutrition isn't actually go, oh, well, I'm going to go all fat adaptation or all carbohydrate. It's actually better to have a mix. We don't ever just burn one set of fuel. We always are in different metabolic demands, no matter what the training, what the session. So lots to consider, but make sure it's right for you. And if at any point it's causing stress, anxiety, changing how you feel around carbohydrates, because at no point do I ever want this concept of, periodizing your carbohydrate to make you think that carbohydrates are bad. This isn't that. That's not the discussion. It's just that when you change what carbohydrates are available in your muscle and your blood supply, you can change what your body has to do in terms of upregulating those signals that can then drive improvements in your performance, but not all the time. You don't want to do that all the time. So yeah, I'm now going to get to questions because I realize I've spoken enough. All right. Oh dear, there is a lot. Anyway, I'll do what I can. Okay, question. Is there a window of when I should eat before working out? So ideally, this is going to depend on tolerance. Anywhere from like 15 minutes out would be great. So for some, they'll need to be eating 90 minutes to 120 minutes before they do anything because that's what their gut tolerance tells them. But if you can manage, particularly those early morning sessions, anywhere from 15 minutes to 60 minutes beforehand, that's going to be a really nice time point. Will eating protein before a workout help me build more muscle? You can absolutely include some protein, but you don't want to have massive amounts of protein for the main reason that it takes a longer time to digest in the stomach, so it can cause gut upset. And really the biggest thing that we want to focus on is carbohydrate and fueling, and then you can have protein afterwards for your recovery. So try and separate it a little bit. If I train before breakfast, should I still have something to eat beforehand? As I said, so what we're looking at there is deciding whether it's a good thing for you to add a small snack in. It doesn't have to be another breakfast. It can just be a really small thing. Like I said, banana, juice, a piece of toast, a crumpet. It doesn't have to be complex. It doesn't have to be expensive, and it doesn't have to be a supplement. It can absolutely be food if your session demands it. So if your session is all about enjoyment of the exercise, getting through it at a high intensity and really good quality and a higher duration, then 100% would recommend having something to eat. How often, if ever, is it advisable to run fasted? So that is one question that there isn't a set time. Like, everyone's going to be really different. I'll absolutely talk to some people and they love running fasted. They feel good. They don't feel hungry. They don't get irritable. They feel like they can hold a really solid pace. For those, running fasted may be a really good option that you have trained your body to do. However, I would trial sometimes having something to eat, particularly if you're training to race. You want to start practicing that, particularly as you get closer to the race day. If you're someone who, when running fasted, feels like they flatline, they hit a wall, they bonk, whatever word you want to use in that term, I would absolutely recommend probably not running fasted all that often, unless it's just a session to get through. It's all about the adaptation and it doesn't matter if you suffer. So for most runs, you might want to have something just to make sure you get the quality out of it and you hit the intensities that you want to as well. Is there a rule for how much you should eat before a 3-hour ride? So for a 3-hour ride, you are going to get to that glycogen depleting point around 90 minutes into your ride. So ideally, we're going to eat beforehand. that 1 to 3 grams of carbohydrate. I usually just go for the 1 to 2, like that is plenty of carbohydrate. You may actually want to have more of a breakfast beforehand to ensure that you're not going to get hungry, but you also ensure that you're not going to be playing catch up, in the back end of that ride. So you have your carbohydrate focused snack, and it might be a little bit bigger, like, a couple of bits of peanut butter toast with banana, goat, by the way, or bircher muesli or oats, taking a little bit more time. My favorite, I think, when I was Ironman training was literally just a couple of crumpets and an up and go. Like, it was just fast, it was easy, I was out the door. But that was just really individual and just an example of what I would go for. And then you would fuel during that ride as well. Should you always fuel the same amount pre-session regardless of the intensity? It is totally okay to vary that. You might get in a rhythm and you might do really similar things each day. And in that case, do the same thing. Do what works, and that way you know what works for competition as well. But if you vary the sessions, if you've got, like, say, a 20-minute recovery run or 40-minute recovery run that is going to be low intensity, your heart rate's going to be low, that may be what you choose to do fasted or on much lower intake pre-training, because you're not going to be hitting those really high carbohydrate demand metabolic needs. However, if it's a session with intervals or longer and higher intensity and it demands quality, you may have a little bit more, and that's okay to vary that for sure. And also increasing more, as we said before, if it's a long session, like in terms of endurance. Oops, choose, press wrong button, sorry team. Next one, how do I approach fueling my body when I train really early in the morning? So I think this question comes up a couple of times. For really early morning sessions, it is very normal not to feel hungry. You may not want to touch anything, and you also may not have time. So assess what kind of session it is, and if fueling is what works for you. If it is something that you're like, oh no, I don't get through the session well if I don't do this properly. I do, get through that session, and I enjoy it more if I do have something. That's where you might have something really, really easy to get down, not too much chewing. So liquid, like up and go, smoothies, juice can all work very, very well there, or just your simple banana or date. So you might have really small amounts and just enough to get you through the session rather than really concentrating on it, because chances are you also won't give yourself much time either. You'll be out the door as soon as you can. I am not going to get through all these questions, but awesome questions. Yes, so this one is very similar. Working out very early because of work, so pre-run at 4 a.m. And you also have to remember what time you went to bed and when was your last meal there. So you may not have actually a very big fasted window. And so you might be going to bed at, say, 9, 10 p.m, depending. Hopefully you're going to bed early if you're getting up at that time to run. But you may only have been fasted for 5, 6, 7 hours. So you may actually be fine to run at that intensity because it hasn't been that long since you ate. Okay, best tips if you're worried about gut upset during training sessions. All right, so if gut upset equals needing to go to the toilet for number 2s, bloating, diarrhea, all those types of things, please see one of our team. Like, I'm not saying that lightly. Do not normalize it. It is common, but it's not normal. So if you are concerned about any of those things, please know that it is manageable. And what we do is we look at what you're currently doing, what the symptoms are, what sessions it happens in, and then there are changes, and really small changes and manageable changes that we can do to your intake in the lead up to those sessions that can reduce the risk of that and manage those symptoms. So yeah, highly recommend working with our team just for like a month. It's pretty much that, just to give us some time to see what's causing it, what will solve it, and then manage that symptoms longer term, particularly if it's, interrupting how confident you feel going out, if it's changing, what pace you can do or what route you can take, because you need to think about toilets, all those types of things. Definitely worthwhile getting on top of. Thoughts on caffeine in energy drinks for fuel on the bike and a try. This is going into intra nutrition, but that's okay. Absolutely can use caffeine. Caffeine is something, just so I could keep it on point, caffeine is actually something you can use when you're training low, for the main reason that caffeine makes things feel easier. It reduces that perceived exertion. It makes things feel less hard. And so if you can use caffeine strategically, even though you're training low, it can make it feel less hard. So that is definitely some times that you can use caffeine, but yeah, caffeine can definitely be a really strategic option during sessions and trials. Oh, good one. Are BCAAs good, worthwhile? No. Stop buying them. They are such a waste of money, and they come from disgusting things. Like, if you look, I'll have to share the reel that I made about it, because yeah, it's gross. It's they are the most useless supplement, well marketed, but there are only very, very rare occasions that I would ever recommend it, and it's very specific. For most people, we are absolutely getting enough. BCAAs are found in protein anyway, particularly our whey protein, WPI. So if you're using BCAAs and protein, stop doubling up, stop wasting money. Honestly, I need to know what marketing they're using, because it's worked very well, but absolutely save your money and fuel with carbohydrate and then recover with your different whey proteins or vegan proteins, whichever you prefer. All right, last one. Okay, what's best to do differently for cardio versus strength? So cardio, if you're going lower intensity recovery side, you may not actually need all that much pre-fueling. You can do a little bit to make sure that you're covering the cost of that training and you're not putting yourself in a really big state of low energy availability, and you can make sure you get through the session. If it's cardio at a higher intensity and a longer duration, then you definitely want to be fueling. You want to be prioritizing that carbohydrate, very similar to what you would want to be doing in strength sessions. So strength sessions are very carbohydrate dominant. That need for instant power and strength is very much centered around carbohydrate availability. And particularly if you're following that strength session with something like your HIIT training and those types of things, fueling those sessions will be a game changer. So absolutely include carbohydrates in the lead up. So excellent. I think I have covered all questions. If you have more, let me know, but I am just going to scroll through to make sure. Brilliant. Okay. So protein up and go with YoPro yogurt. Yeah, so with the up and goes and YoPro yogurt, they're great recoveries. If it's just for fueling a session, you don't have to stress the protein as much. It won't harm. Absolutely, but you can just go normal Greek yogurt or flavored yogurt. It's when you can have the more processed cereals. You know, you actually want those easy to digest carbs in that point. And yeah, so hopefully either of those is fine, but you can use the protein up and goes and YoPro yogurts for recovery just as well as also. But I think I'll have to cover that in another session. Awesome. Thanks so much, team. And thank you for joining. I'd better jump off. I've got a meeting to run to, but thank you. Bye.